Hi there. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. This is number 20, where I am in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So just type in your name and let me know where you're from. I see Mark Rhodes Taylor there. Hi, Kate Milafalce. You're very, very welcome. Debbie, there's Ronnie, Luna, Stephanie. So just say where you're from. Hi, Lisa from Washington. Lovely to see you. Hi, Frank. You're here finally. That's lovely to see you. And Asaha from Nigeria. Very, very welcome. New York, Baton Rouge. Hi, Judith. Hi, Zane from California, Suffolk, Skegness. And somebody from Oz. I see that the names are going really fast. Wyoming, France, Taiwan, Brittany, Washington State, Glastonbury, Kentucky. It's just amazing how global the audience here is. Just Colorado, wonderful. The Isle of Skye, I've never been, someday. Portugal, Malvern, beautiful. Hi, so it's all wonderful to see you again at this time of Imbolc. And in Ireland, Imbolc marks the beginning of spring. That's the old way, and it's still, the weather may not agree with that, but I've been programmed to think that spring has already started. So let me introduce you to, hi, wait a second, Sal from Tyrone, wonderful, Northern Ireland, Yorkshire, brilliant, Sweden, Poitiers in France, Cumberland. Andy Gordon, is it from Cumberland or Cumbernauld? Anyway, you're so welcome. Let me introduce you to my guest this evening. And we're in the UK. In what did you say? This is Ricky Gellissen, and you're so welcome, Ricky.
Thank you.
And you said you're what used to be North Kent is now South London. Am I right?
Yes, yes. Has been for a while now, but yeah, just puts it on the boundaries there. The Borg of London absorbed a chunk of Kent. So it's just in people's minds for a map where was Northwest Kent is now Southeast London.
So, and are you from there?
I'm originally from Kent, but from further into Kent. So I was born in Maidstone.
Okay. So what's your landscape like where you live?
It's fairly urban, but it's kind of right on the border. So one of the nice things near where I am is there used to be some large sewage works, which doesn't sound very nice, but they have since been turned into a nature reserve. So they've got a large lake where there are geese and ducks and sometimes swans, and there's a large sort of wooded area to walk through. So yeah, and it's hidden just off the road. So it goes a distance sort of lengthwise running alongside a tram track. And the other boundary hits upon a large cemetery. But you've got this chunk of woodland and lakeland there. So you can virtually miss the turn. You can walk along the main road, and there is a couple of small turnings that lead into it, and you could walk past it and just kind of think, well, what's that behind the fence? And if you're coming from the other direction, what was behind the fence was a graveyard, and you don't really think it's turned into anything else. And it's actually a nice little nature reserve.
Wonderful. Very
there's another park, a recreational park, sort of about a mile down the road, for which its one claim to fame is one of the outside features is now grade 2 listed. It's a bandstand where David Bowie is supposed to have written, I think it was Space Oddity. So it's the claim to fame of Croydon Recreational Ground.
Okay, so it's now a tourist attraction, yes?
No. There will be people wandering. Occasionally it will be open, but it's sort of all fenced off, nicely fenced off, but you're not allowed to actually go onto the bandstand because it is listed.
Okay. So just what brought you to Druidry?
Accidental druid.
One.
I know. I think it was more a case of meeting up with various friends. I think when I started to almost come out of the room closet, so I was getting semi-open about being pagan with some people. And at that stage, I would have identified as Druish. In fact, I remember once going to a pride function where somebody tried leading me towards the gay Christians, and I said, no, it just came out of my mouth. I said, I'm Druish. And he said, oh, and he grabbed me and led me all the way along to where the gay Jewish stand was. I said, no, Druish. I lean towards Druidry. Said, there isn't a gay pagan stand here. And I think that was one of the things when a friend of mine suggested I go along with her to a gay pagans meeting, which I started doing. And I was also then getting into some of the pagan scene within London. So one of the things was there was Beltane Bash that used to be on once a year in Holborn in Red Lion Square. And it was one of those where I bumped into another friend of mine that I'd known from the scene, but I had no idea he was pagan. It was the pagan pride parade had finished in Russell Square at the fountains, and it finished with people doing a spiral dance in and out of the fountains.
Oh, lovely.
Very wet on a May Day, but it just happened to be doing that spiral dance that I looked and suddenly saw this friend of mine that I'd known from about 5 years before and hadn't seen going in the opposite spiral. He then introduced me to some other friends, and one of them was somebody who used to go along to the Anderida Gorseth camps.
Okay.
Bard. And there was coming up another of the Anderida Gorseth conferences that happens around Imwelk. And they're saying, oh, you need to come along to it. So I went to that and found it one of those things where you kind of go, this is what I was missing. That was one of those moments when you went there and thought, oh, this is like home.
Yeah.
People that really resonated. And that led to going on some of the Anderida Gorseth camps, because there used to be the spring and the autumn camps. And having dipped my toe in the water there, of actually meeting other people that explored what I considered Druidry, even though everything I had done had been either my own just experience or reading. And with that link with OBOD, which daft as I was, I didn't initially place Dave the Bard and OBOD together, but hey.
Imagine not.
But it was like, well, okay, let's look at the course. And then I sort of joined to start with the Bardic grade and then spent eternity on the one grade.
Like me. Are you still on it?
No, I as of last Saturday, I got written confirmation from my mentor that I could now enter the OVEC grade. So I'm waiting for the package to arrive.
Well, Cord, congratulations.
It only took me a decade to finally get round to it. I had submitted a Bardic review and got told we need more. And I just sat there going, oh, what do I do? And each time I went to do it, I couldn't complete it. And just got stuck on a Groundhog Day, which is a fitting time considering what we've just passed.
Indeed. It's I mean, I've had a number of conversations with my guests around the journey through the grades and the GWERS, and I sometimes see comments from people saying, you know, I'm 2 years at the Bardic grade and I'm just so slow and I'm really this, that, and the other. And I know other people did it in a year, and I go, I did it in 7. You've done it in 10. Everybody, and I see Craig Smith saying it happens when the time is right. And Craig, you're so right there that everybody has their own pace, and you are who you are, and you can only do it at your pace. So now is the right time. And a magical journey in the OVEC grade awaits you.
Yeah, it took a change in stance, I think, in how I was trying to write it even.
Okay.
Because I think when I first submitted wasn't that long after, well, a few years after I'd done my master's, and my brain was so into, and I must reference this and this and this. And when I got the first draft, it was like, oh, really? Am I leaning towards a dissertation? And then when I was asked to resubmit, that just made me think, oh, I've got to evidence this more.
Yes, I get it.
Sometime later, it's like, do you know what? 2 sides of foolscap, that's what you're going to get. Then, and from that, I got, okay, can you expand on these things? And that was fine. But it was enough to get them to say, can you expand on these? And then I knew where to go. And
yes.
until it's almost like when you go for a job interview, you answer part of a question, and you don't answer it fully, and they give you a prompt, and then you come through exactly the answer they want.
Brilliant.
And that's kind of how I felt in doing this, that once I got the prompt, I could answer it. But when I was just trying to come out with it straight away, it wasn't there.
I understand that. It took me 6 years before I'd even applied for a mentor, because I was so paranoid about not being able to write. And I'm not a writer, and I'm not a bard, and all this internal narrative going on in my head. And then I did it, and I thought, well, and then when I did my review in one go, and I thought, what was all the fuss about? But I think I had to go through all this nonsense in my head before I could come out and actually recognize, now I can get it. It doesn't matter. And I decided when I did my OBOD, when I started on the OBOD grade, I wasn't going to do the same thing. I was going to apply straight away for a tutor, and I did. And that was the best thing I did. But it's that thing about narratives. What are they looking for? How do I write it? All that kind of thing. It's, and you just have to get out of your own way. It took me a while to do that, of course, but I did it. I'm glad. and now, you know, so, oops, God, I've shut you up. Sorry. Forgive me.
Was I talking too much already? Okay.
No. It's. I'm looking for the cursor when I have to just to check for comments. So, so you were. I better say this right. You were Druish before you started going to the Anderda Gorsets and before you joined OBOD. What was your first spiritual experience?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think way before, I mean, the whole thing that drew me towards paganism was an early investment in mythology and folklore as a child and as a teenager. And as a late teenager, I was 17 when I joined the army.
Okay.
And the army had a habit of they like putting you in the right little box and pigeonhole. Doesn't matter if you're a round peg or a square peg, you go in the one that they allocate you. And so they went by their documentation. So when I joined the army, they didn't want to acknowledge paganism in any shape or form.
Okay.
I know of a colleague of mine in the army who very clearly said pagan when asked about his religion, and they kept on saying, no, you can't have that. He said, but that's what I am, pagan. And he said, we'll put you down the Church of England. Because my birth parents were Catholic, they just looked, all right, Roman Catholic, that's what you are. And that started from basic training, where, again, because the military was because the Queen and everything is Church of England, they're look at the minority groups. So as far as they're concerned, Roman Catholics are a minority group. Mm-hmm. And they've got to show that they're sympathetic to them. So whether you're interested in Catholicism or not is not part of the process. During basic training, every week, we had to go and spend an hour or two with the Monsignor.
Oh, God. Okay.
And all the C of E lads just got time off. Go have an extra fag break or whatever. We had to go in, whether you wanted to or not. And that persisted throughout my time in the military. And part of it, I found it useful because it was away from some of the stuff that the military do. So there's a little bit of, okay, it's almost like a sanctuary. And when I went stationed in Germany, it was like, well, you're Catholic, what can we do for you? I thought, oh, okay. It's the Feast of Our Lady of Assumption next week. Can I have that off so I can go to Mass? Yes, you can. So it's like, okay. So the first sort of thing wasn't even that spiritual to begin with. But as I started going along to more things as an adult, I hadn't done this all as a child. As an adult, I started going along to various masses and that as a Catholic, as it was one way of escaping from the military. So any hint I'd had before then of paganism sort of went out the window, and it's like, okay, I can do smells and bells. That'll work.
Yeah.
Even to the extent of I went on the 25th International Military Pilgrimage to Lourdes, where they packed us off. They paid for us all to go by train from where I was in Germany across to Lourdes and spend the week at Lourdes.
What year was this?
It was something like 83, 84, something like that.
I went to Lourdes in 76.
And I guess Lourdes was a place where one of the captains that came with us from the Queen Alexandra Royal Army Nursing Corps, she was actually a Jew, but she came for the pilgrimage to Lourdes. And she was sort of saying the same, how much of a spiritual experience she experienced inside the basilica. So fine, in Lourdes, if you're in the basilica, it was very spiritual. And it was there for me too. Well before I did anything druidic. And it was just the fact that you had so many minds of the same purpose and treating things with a fair degree of reverence. That didn't mean that after hours, people didn't behave like complete and utter idiots and get drunk as skunks, because they did. And in fact, because it's a military pilgrimage, I remember one of the nights getting changed out of my number 2 dress and getting into civvies, and I just felt myself ostracized. I went straight back to the hotel room and changed into uniform and came back, and military from all different nations were suddenly friends with me again.
Wow.
It was very much the military pilgrimage and the Catholic side, but the whole aspect of Lourdes. And within that, when you were within the basilica area, it was very reverential. When you went just the step outside, it became much more touristy. I remember one of the things that tickled my sense of humor the most was going to one tourist shop, and everything had the image of the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
But it was one shop that was selling flick knives with the Madonna on the handle. And it was just, I just thought that was hilarious. But that would have been going to Lourdes itself and getting dunked under the water and things. That kind of felt a very spiritual moment.
Well, were you? That's really because I didn't feel it at all spiritual. I went there as a handmaid, working in the hospital. My father used to go there every year. He was a GP, and he would go as a doctor every year. And then there was a group of people, nurses and doctors, that went, and I went as a handmaid. Sounds so nice. Working in the hospital, that I loved. Were you doing anything like that as a member of the army? Were you helping, or?
I mean, I was officially supposed to be going there just as part of an international military pilgrimage.
Okay.
But there was myself and there was my roommate at the time who was also Catholic, and we both went on this together. So we were both combat medical technicians, or medics, paramedics, whatever you'd like to label at the time. So this is before I started nursing.
Okay.
There were a couple of QA, the Queen Alexandra Royal Army Nursing Corps sisters with us. And we ended up, there were 2 Chelsea pensioners.
Mm-hmm.
And so it ended up that one sister and one medic walked everywhere with the Chelsea pensioner.
Oh, okay.
Now, we had to set off probably half an hour earlier than everyone else, not because of the pace the pensioner could walk, but if you've ever seen the military QA sisters, so they've got these, they're grey uniforms, and they've got the really bright red capes, and they're wearing the hang gliders.
Oh, I had one of those. This is a student.
So they're dressed in their formal dress, bright red capes, hang gliders, their best dress. Myself and my friend David were both in number 2 dress, sort of the posh uniform for parades and things, with our medic cap badge and all that on. And then we had a Chelsea pensioner each in their full Chelsea pensioner, full greatcoat, the proper ceremonial red coat and the little kepi sort of hat. So there was myself and a sister called Judith, and our pensioner was called Pat. I cannot remember what the other pensioner was called, but the three of us travelled in one group, and a few feet ahead would be David, the sister he was with, and the pensioner he was with. But therefore, everybody military wanted photo ops, and we had to pause all the time because we've never seen this combination before.
Wow!
So it became a bit of a working busman's holiday almost. But it was also really worth it, and I think that was part of it, because working then as a medic and working with other nurses and sisters, and you were both taking care of, not literally in the physical sense, although you did offer an arm to prop them up as they needed it, but you're trying to make sure that these two gents and the Chelsea pensioners had the best experience they could have. Yeah. And so that pulled you in to a degree. So then when you did participate in things, there was again that whole bonding that came into it. I think that probably affected how I viewed things when I did go to mass and when I did go and take the waters or be dunked in them. Oh, and that was, pardon my French, bloody cold. And they strip you off and they slap this wet loincloth around you. And it's freezing cold. And it's bad enough when you get people in gym changing rooms doing a towel whip. When it is a cold, frozen, wet piece of cloth that's wrapped around your private parts. Woof.
Stop whinging. You only had it around your waist. I had it around from here.
My nipples liberated.
Okay, so that was Lourdes. And how long did you stay in Germany for? And then when did you come back to the UK?
I was in Germany for 4 and a bit years, and I came back in '85 and worked at the military hospital in Aldershot.
Okay.
And I also did a brief tour with the Army Medical Services mobile display team. So basically, it's once I'd already given my notice to the forces that I was leaving, I got put on this display team touring the country. You know, the ones where you see like on Army Day and everything, demonstrating what a military hospital does and simulation and that kind of thing, as almost like a recruitment drive. And it felt like I was obliged to recruit a certain number of soldiers before I'd be allowed to leave. I'm not sure that's the official deal, but that's what it felt like.
How many did you need to replace you?
I'm not sure if they're doing it pound for pound.
So you were
left the army in '87.
Were you a paramedic for training? You said you were in the medical corps, but what were you doing?
So when I started, the official title was medical assistant, and then during that they changed it, and you got the title they now use. So you'll hear them talk about where they've got vaccination teams going out, and they've got people who are combat medical technicians.
Oh, okay.
So when they did that change and that upgrade, they also had a facility at the time. Paramedics as a term in the UK was not widely used. Most places still had ambulance drivers. They didn't have many people who qualified as paramedics. There was an organisation at the time, Paramedics UK, who would allow us to sit an exam with them, and if we could demonstrate that we'd done so many live intubations and so many cannulations and we passed their exam, then we could earn the title paramedic, but we weren't technically paramedics. That was just kicking off at the time. But I'd actually joined to do my nursing, and had been round peg square hole. We need medics. We don't want you as a nurse. Go there. And it took some time of attempting to change into nursing and just getting blocked. And the last time I was being blocked, and they said, if we turn you down on this occasion, what will you do? I said, I'll give my notice and go Civvy Street. And I think they thought I was bluffing, because they turned around and said, no, you're not giving it. So that's it. Handed my notice and applied to Civvy Street, and then got a place that offered me a year's deferment.
Okay.
The moment I got that, it's like, here's my notice, bye. and then went to Civvy Street and did my nursing.
Wonderful. I never looked back.
No, not really. There are bits, but again, one of the things for me at the time was when I joined the army, I was under 21 anyway. I joined at 17, and at that stage, the law of the UK is you weren't allowed to be gay until you were 21.
There was an age limit.
The age of consent in England was 21, and if you were found, and the system at the time is if you were found having sex under the age of 21, although it was allegedly to protect young men, both parties could be prosecuted. So you were both criminal, but it also had that even when you were allowed the age of consent of 21, that excluded the armed forces. You weren't allowed to be gay in the military.
Anyway.
But my mind was thinking, well, I'm illegal anyway. What does it matter if I'm doubly illegal by being gay and in the army? Apart from the fact that I wasn't fully out to myself at that stage, but even so, I was kind of like, well, okay. But after some years in the forces and having to do that double life existence and then still not getting what I actually joined for, it was like, is this worth it anymore? And that's when I then got a place in Civvy Street to do nursing. It's like, you're not letting me change to nursing in the army, which is I went for. And I have to live this double life. How about just leaving? So I did.
Right.
And I think it was after that I started re-exploring pagan roots again. And in fact, it was about 3 years after that, without having actually discussed anything specific, one of the patients on the ward turned around and said, "You should be a druid."
Go away.
And I think that planted the seed there to think, well, what do you mean? Because it's not like I had the full or half Gandalf that I used to have. It was a very smaller cropped beard than this even. This has had to trim down because of wearing face masks and COVID. But as you know, the beard used to be down, yeah. But that looks very silly with a mask on. So it's not that I looked the part of druid. I don't know what made him say that, and he didn't quite clarify, but he said I should look into it. And so I read things up, and I thought that's nearer to where I felt I lay than sort of eclectic witch or whatever other people would normally call themselves in introductory paganism.
Uh-huh.
And that kind of set me thinking on that part of it that I hadn't quite gone for was I think people who weren't druids and were pagan were pretty much telling me I had to believe in the whole Welsh pantheon or Irish pantheon to be a druid. If I didn't actually believe in that pantheon, then no, I couldn't possibly be. And it was kind of like, no, lots of other things resonated, but I didn't believe in any particular pantheon like that. I could see some of the archetypes, but being told, and it was bad information for me, but it was people saying, oh no, if you don't worship the Welsh deities, you can't be a druid. And I think obviously that still exists with a whole variety of people telling you what does or doesn't make you a druid. Over time now, it's got like, yeah, you police what gateway you want. I know what I'm going to call myself.
Absolutely. Someone has a question here. I don't know if this, I don't know how you're going to answer this, but how has Ricky explored and investigated his Druid ancestry roots?
Okay.
If you have any,
and that I don't think I do. Any obvious ones anyway. Apart from sort of socially, culturally, my birth parents were both Roman Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Further back maybe, but the other aspect is that my birth parents, neither of whom were British. My parents come from Germany.
Oh, okay.
So there may have been going back some old. Again, I had a variety of pagans telling me, well, if you're Germanic, then you should be Norse, and you should go for. And it's like, no, But yeah, I'm not sure how much the area of Germany they came from would have reflected Druidry.
And do you think it's important that they do have ancestry or roots in Druidry?
Actually, no. And again, it depends what people are considering Druidry to be. I've never been one that subscribes to this whole idea of lineage. I've seen this amongst people some of my friends who are Wiccan, and it's like, I've come from this particular line and I was trained by this person. And then you get another section who are not necessarily British traditional Wiccans, but are people who either call themselves Wiccans or people who say, oh, I follow witchcraft, who are then going back about, well, for the past 400 years, my family has been this. And I'm kind of thinking, I don't know about you, but I can't even tell you the names of my grandparents' parents, let alone what religion they were. And I know with a lot of my friends here, they know who their parents are, and they might know the first names of their grandparents, but they're more likely to know them as grandma and grandpa, or for me, it was Orma and Orpa. But knowing beyond that, I can't even trace who half my family are. So how would I know their religion and then establish this lineage? What I do consider relevant is more when talking about ancestors of spirit. So rather than ancestors of blood, I'd look at ancestors of spirit and ancestors of place. And can I see a connection there? Because I don't necessarily feel that ancestry with blood. And I also think when so often trying to look at opening things up and keeping, as much as we want some things to be exclusive, we still want a broader range to be inclusive. So it sounds a bit contradictory, but there are various things where you say this I'll accept as being a part of Druidry. And there are other things that, well, that doesn't sound that Druidic to me. So you have that bit of exclusion there that, if you're doing X, Y, Z, that doesn't sound, what I would consider to be very Druidic. So if someone's going around saying, I'm going to burn all the forests I find, I'm going, it doesn't sound very Druidic to me. Whereas if someone turns around and tells me they're a tree-hugging dirt worshipper, but they also follow this particular pantheon, it's like, yeah, okay, that'll work. So I kind of think at the moment you start making things exclusive because of ancestry of blood, well, what have you done to all the orphans? Let's just start with that. Anybody who's been an orphan or adopted and doesn't know their lineage, are you saying that they don't have a place in society?
Absolutely. I think that's really.
I think if you can find a connection with ancestor of spirit or ancestor of place, that's much more important.
Jane says, well said, Ricky, there's too much of that lineage hierarchy happens on social media and it is absolute rubbish. She's not mincing her words. Taking responsibility for who you are is key to being grounded in the present time. And I know from Pat Booker, Pat has been, I've been her guest and she's been my guest. I couldn't really care about ancestors of blood further back than the ones I knew when alive, but ancestors of place and tradition are important to me. And I think that's so important. That your thing about orphans or people who've been adopted. I know it, and it's really interesting because you come from a Catholic background, as do I, and certainly within Roman Catholicism, the line of succession back to St. Peter is really important. For a bishop is ordained by a bishop who can claim his line of succession. I remember. Pope Benedict had a go at the Church of England saying it wasn't a real church, it was only an ecclesial communion because it didn't have the line of succession back to St. Peter. Now I know there are others who would challenge that line of succession anyway, but human lineages are highly flawed. I mean, you actually don't know who your ancestors are. You may know who all the mothers were, but you certainly don't know who the fathers are. It's highly dubious. And I've had that, people ask me about my own, was my ancestors Druids? If they were, I don't know. But for me, it's the landscape. It's the land on which I live. And that's what's important. And certainly with the order that, because it's such a global organization and a really important one, that it's ancestors of spirit, ancestors of place are really, really important. And if we're lucky enough to know who our ancestors are, I can go back to my great grandparents because somebody did a family tree on my mother's side, and then a lot of the records were broken, or were destroyed in the Civil War, etc. Somebody says here, I've no Druid ancestors, but I remember being one long, long time ago. I've had those memories since I was a very young child. So maybe we have either, maybe if you believe in past lives, memories, or whatever it is, have a sense. That may be the case. We can never prove it. And it's not important, except important to the individual themselves, that if you have that sense of, like, I have a sense that I was burnt or I was killed as a witch or a wise woman in previous lifetimes. I was worried for a while it would happen in this lifetime, metaphorically rather than physically. I'm no longer worried about that. I've broken that pattern. I've no proof of that, but it's a sense I've had. I'm a mouthy woman, and there's lots of cultures and societies where that has never been welcomed. And in the Catholic Church, for example. But you may have a sense, but it's not something to wield over somebody else, as in, I'm more of a Druid than you because whatever. Because I have this in my DNA.
Again, to me, it's also like you can have an order like we've got OBOD, in which you're perfectly entitled for within OBOD to say, here is a gatekeeper, because this is an organization and it's a mystery tradition you're joining. But that is the gateway into OBOD. It's not a gateway into Druidry in total. You can't turn around and say, oh, you're British Druid Order, you don't count. It's like, no, they have their gatekeepers as well. And it's the people that want to constantly set themselves up as gatekeepers, the ones who almost use that argument fallacy of no true Scotsman.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's, no, you're not a real Druid if you do X, Y, Z. And Druids of old used to spend 21 years learning. Yeah, perhaps they did. But Druids of old never had a school system where people had actually learnt English, other languages, mathematics, geometry, geography, before they even looked at anything else. So try looking at like with like. So the people that are saying, oh, you're not this, that, or the other, that's why deciding for yourself becomes one of the first things. Normally with some justification for why you're doing that, because otherwise you can just turn around and say, oh, I'm the Archdruid in charge of the whole of the UK, and now prove me wrong. But as a general sense, you're looking at what makes you feel authentic as a Druid. I can't talk for what Druidry was like, at 200 years BC. I don't have a clue. The nearest I've got is whatever I've read in Ron's books. Professor Ronald Hutton turns in and gives me a timeline. I can go, okay, yeah, I've seen that. That's a historian. He's looked at that, and that's how Druids were represented. But as in some of his own books, he's kind of said he knows a lot about how Druids were perceived and portrayed of that time, not so much of what they actually did. So if history can't find it, somebody from some strange little group of Druids on the internet declaring that they're the only true Druids, and if anyone isn't Irish, they're not a real Druid at all. And it's like, okay, you be your authority, I'll be mine.
It's a really interesting one that, well, if you're not of a Celtic ancestry or you're not Irish, you're not a real Druid. When you look at Christianity, for example, it started in the Middle East and it's moved all over the world, and nobody ever says, sorry, Christianity originated in Palestine, and unless you're Palestinian, you can't call yourself a Christian. And the idea that there are American Christians or African Christians or South American Christians or whatever, European Christians, it's we don't have that discourse around Christianity.
Yeah.
But there were Druidry for some reason.
I think along the lines of Christopher Hughes from the Anglesey Druid Order, where he's kind of saying, well, it's not that this belongs to the Welsh Druids, it's that they've got some of the better kept records and they're the current custodians and curators of Druidry, but the Druidry refers to Druidry in total, not just this is what happened in part of Wales. And I think that's kind of the relevant part. I mean, the other one of jumping on the bandwagon was somebody going on about cultural appropriation. It's like, well, no, we've got, what records do we have? And the two best records we've got kept are either from Ireland or Wales, but we know it applied to a wider area. And it all depends on how much. I've got no problems with someone turning around saying, I'm not a druid, I'm a neo-druid. Go for that. Hands up. I have absolutely no idea what happened umpty 100 and 1,000 years ago. I know what's happened in comparative recent terms, and I know some of the history of what's happened since Iolo Morganac came along and said, hey, let's resurrect this. And it's like, fine, call me neo-druid, that's fine. I've got no problem being seen as a neo-pagan. We've got our own traditions. And
absolutely.
You can start a tradition from today. It doesn't have to have a 100-year history to be valid.
Well, traditions start with the first event. You may not know the tradition until it's been repeated several times and you begin to notice a pattern. Lest you be accused of tartanism, you better be careful of that. But you're familiar with tartanism? That's an invention of a tradition that never was, because they claim that tartans being attributed to various clans in Scotland is modern and not ancient.
Yes.
Well, Howard, my late husband, he wore both a Campbell and a Buchanan tartan, so he liked tartan. But I don't have. I'm not invested in that. But just teasing a little bit. But I think it's around. I think it comes back to our own individual practice as a druid. I know I'm a druid. I feel it. I know it. I can't defend it. I can't justify it. It's just something I have within. And it was Michael who brought up that feeling about that sense of him going way back in time, that being a druid. And that is fine. That is a personal, that's your personal experience. And all of us have our own personal experiences, because druidry does not have a set, a dogmatic set of teachings. And it's about, we walk our own individual path, and then we are connected by common values and a common ethos, shall we say. And so, like, we can be, there are druids who combine it with Catholicism. I don't, but others do, or Buddhism or Hinduism or paganism or atheism or whatever it is, Wiccan. It doesn't matter.
I think that's one of the things that drew me, is the fact that it is dogma light.
Yeah.
And it is experiential, and that it centers around connection. That may be connection with nature, it may be connection with ancestors, it may be connection with wider community, but those were the qualities that attracted me. I remember a couple of years ago, I was out at a conference in Egypt, and I was very wary where I was in Egypt, because I didn't feel I could be out as a druid, and I didn't feel I could be out as a gay man. This did not feel a safe environment.
Okay.
And one of my consultant colleagues in the middle of the conference starts talking, and he'd heard from someone as one of the other consultants had let slip that I was into druidry. And then he said, well, what makes you a druid? And it was like, you're saying this in the middle of the conference hall. So I was really vague in an answer anyway, plus the fact that it's like always that debate of how do you define druidry? And I'm trying to go through, and he's going, yeah, but anyone could do that. So anyone could be a druid. I'm going, yes, we're welcoming. So I could call myself a druid. We have people who are druid and Muslim, if you would like to. That's fine. And it completely bemused him that I wasn't putting down, here are these clear parameters. You must believe this, this, and this. I said, well, some people view druidry more as a philosophy than as a religion. Some people see it as more of a religion. There are different ways people interpret it. Well, how do you know who's what then? Do you know what you are?
Exactly. There's something from Ben Hopkinson here. I love a quote I first came across in the Bardic Wars, which said something like, it's a paraphrase, seek out where the footsteps of the path were going, not how they got there. And I think that's a really interesting, because where are we going as we move forward? We have a link to the past, whatever that past is, but it's around our Druidry being relevant for today. And to get back to, tradition starting today, when you look at most of the big religions, there were, say the Islam, Judaism, Christianity are revealed religions. Somebody said God spoke to them. And it started from then and moved forward. Likewise, that we evolve, and this spiritual path of Druidry, okay, it comes from the revival. There are still threads from the past. We can get it, and we get it from our landscape, and then it's continuing to evolve to be relevant to the times we live in.
I think one of the other things is that there is that confusion and conflation between cultural Druidry and spiritual Druidry. So it's the standard thing when somebody will turn around and point out that the Queen is a Druid.
Yes.
Because she attended an Eisteddfod, and it's like, you do realise that's a different Druidic order, and by all means she can call herself a Druid for that, but that's not anything to do with her spiritual being. That's because, and in fact she isn't a Druid anymore. She had it withdrawn because she can't speak Welsh.
Oh, okay. Was that a condition on which...
We had a condition about the Welsh language being used at the Eisteddfods, and so her honorary Druid status was kind of withdrawn some years ago, apparently.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I know the former Archbishop of Canterbury was a Druid. Am I right? Again, I don't know if it was a cultural Druid.
I think his may have been reversed at the same time when they brought in some tighter rules about language in the Eisteddfods.
We have Church of England ministers who are members of the order, so we will not revoke their membership for not speaking Welsh.
Yeah. This was as a cultural Eisteddfod. It's like, okay, if you're trying to promote the Welsh language and literature, that's okay to stick that into a rule because it's a cultural thing. It's not a
unless somebody wants to learn Welsh. So anyway, so you're a Druid. Is it something you are or something you do?
A bit of both. I think because, like with OBOD and BDO, we've got the different sort of grades within Druidry that you're used to thinking, are you a bard, are you an ovate, are you a druid? And that has a different meaning to whether you say I am a druid as shorthand. And more commonly, when people ask me, I say I follow Druidry rather than claiming I am a druid. But there are other times I'll just use that shorthand. So yeah, druid, hands up. Even though I'm not at druid grade, because I think what the general public perceive within Druidry and what somebody with a druid order perceives are two different things. So, to try and explain to someone, oh, well, I'm just entering an ovate grade, and you haven't been able to give them a clear answer what Druidry is, and then you're trying to explain what the hell an ovate is. It's like, no. So I think the label druid is a handy shorthand. You're not likely to get two people with clear definitions in agreement, but otherwise I see it as something that, as I said before, it's experiential. There were parts when I first started reading books on Druidry where I was being driven a little bit insane because you get about 3 sentences in and they go, now you must do this practice, and come back 3 weeks later. It's like, no, I bought a book. I want to read it and find out now. And I couldn't understand at the beginning why everyone wanted to send me off and go in the woods and talk to a twig that you find or whatever the exercise was. It was like, no, tell me more. Give me some. As much as I wanted it to be dogma-like, give me some clear, explicit instructions. It's like, well, go off and do this and see how it makes you feel, and then write about it. But how do I know if I've done it right?
Wow, there's the question.
Yeah. and going back to do my Bardic review, it's like, oh God, I've spent this long doing this. Oh God, do I know if I'm giving what should be the right answer? And eventually it's like, I don't care, I'm giving the answer that's right for me. And it took me a long time to get round to that. Because before that, it was very much like, I'm used to doing all sorts of exams where it's like, here's the question, here is an answer. And even in terms of test papers, so that it was sort of like, oh, can you know, like when you do a degree course and somebody will allow you to look at some previous dissertations so you know what structure you're looking at. It's like, somebody show me some previous Bardic reviews. I need to see what the hell I'm supposed to write about. That was one of the things that was like, had I seen almost like some past papers to get an idea of? But it's like, no, you want me to come out of this out of the top of my head? So that the whole experience, you can only start saying and owning that once you've gone through it. And when you're first starting, it's like, oh, please just give me a clear answer.
I remember.
And it's one of those things that you only properly appreciate with hindsight.
And you see, it is a mystery tradition. What is Jules' cousin says, you write your own test. I mean, that's that. It's a mystery school, and it takes you. It's around taking your own responsibility and actually trusting that and trusting that knowing. And that's a scary place when you haven't been given, kind of little, what do you call it, feelers. Yeah. So, but that even notion, of going out and holding a twig and tuning into it and seeing what comes up. And then that lesson in learning to trust what it is that has come to you and to be able to discern, is this just my own imaginings, or is this something of value and something I need to listen to? And that's all part of the journey, is being able to trust that. And of course, yes, hindsight's a great teacher, and you have to have gone through it. And some of my guests have told me, they've gone through the Bardic grade 3 times, that they come through and they go, that's great, I've done that. And then I have to go back to the beginning and then get something else out of it and go, oh, and then I have to go back again. Paul, for example, I don't know if you listened to our conversation. He said after he'd finished the Druid grade, he realized he knew absolutely nothing. And he's now gone back to the Bardic grade. And I think it's that lovely journey, because it's everybody's own path, and it's not a reflection on him. Oh, you don't know anything by the end of the 3rd grade or the Druid grade. You should. It's not. It's about recognizing that the more you know, the less you know, and there's a vast wealth of knowledge to be tapped into, and that being in that non-knowing place is a wonderful place. So there's something here from, this is a bit flippant, I want to come up here. This is from Frank Martinez. Welsh Druids of old, said Jin, I'm told till spell it they could not. What is it? I'm sorry. That was in honor of Christopher Hughes. So I don't know what that means. Forgive me. It's anyway, something humorous. But that place of not knowing and just going with the mystery I think is part of it. To paraphrase somebody else that just tickled me was not just Druidry, but paganism in general, is that huge chunk of paganism is learning how to go out into nature and just be silent. And it's that whole thing about contemplating things. And like I say, in the early days, I just wanted to give me clear answers. And later it's like, well, no, just let me mull it over myself and see where I fit in. And so that whole idea of going out and being silent and contemplating it makes more sense now than it did. It does. And you don't have, there's no exam at the end of this. You write a review, and that's about your reflections on your experiencing. It's not about, or do you get a first, a second, or a third class honor? It's not about that. So it's all about your experience and how you engage. And it can be, I went out to the woods on a particular day, I got nothing, or I didn't enjoy it at all. And reflecting on that is just as powerful as reflecting on, 20 trees spoke to me and gave me great messages about my path, that all that you experience has a validity, and it's being able to trust that. Somebody says, Gail, I like this notion of leaning into the mystery, letting mystery surround and be with you. Be with mystery brings such growth. Absolutely, Gail. I think that's lovely. I love that notion of leaning into the mystery. Oh, sorry. It's lovely to go back and read all the things we wrote in our journals. That's from Maka Smith. But yeah, leaning into the mystery. I like that.
That was one of the other things. Journaling. I have never been good at journaling. I've tried it. I managed for a while, and then I either look back and read it and say, oh, what an arse were you, and how pretentious were you in what you were writing? Or I do bullet points, which for a lot of things, bullet points are really useful. But if you go back too long, a gap between having written them and afterwards, it's like, what the hell was I referencing with this?
Yeah.
And I was, like I say, I was never too good at the concept of journaling. And when it said in the initial verse that you may want to journal, you may not, it's like, I've got permission, I don't then. And my journals were incredibly brief. And so when I came to try and write things up later, it was like, well, how do I relate to that? Because I've not actually written that bit. I have to think about what do I remember from that. And that's where I almost went to two structures, like let's read this verse and now write a bit to answer this. It's like, no, that's not working either. Mm-hmm. I eventually just had to go with, look, I can't tell. One of the big lessons I got was I used to compartmentalize things a lot. I found that very useful. Working as a combat medical technician, I spent a lot of time in casualty when I was based in a hospital. Mm-hmm. And opening little boxes with, we've just dealt with this trauma scene, now put it in that box and close it. And if I want to look at it later, I can. But if I don't, it's a box locked away. And I found that compartmentalization useful. I found the fact that I had to separate during that time whatever I did as a gay activity from whatever I did as a military activity, meant I had to have separate little boxes there. So I went through lots of compartmentalization. And again, I used to work in HIV care, and I was working in palliative care. And again, just as a survival mechanism, various things went into boxes so that you could close a day and say, let's put that away and go home. Or you drag everything home with you, which sometimes happened. But I got so used to into compartmentalizing things that then trying to join them up later. And I was saying one of the things that drew me to Drew's connection. I had to learn how to deconstruct some of those boxes. There are still boxes in there, and some of those are going to stay locked. Mm-hmm. But that's life. But when it came to asking, for instance, what I learned during my time in the Bardic grade,
yeah,
when I finally submitted the review that led to me putting in my formal application for OVATE, it's like, I just had to say, do you know what? I've so grown out of compartmentalization now and looking at the interconnectedness of things that I can't tell you this is what I learnt from my Bardic grade. What I can tell you is this is what my thinking was and my attitude and what I did at this period, which is pre-Bardic grade. This is how I've perceived things and what I do now, which is 10 years after having started the Bardic grade. So I can't tell you which bits I learnt solely because I put it into practice from a course, and which bits are just the evolution of me and my personal growth over that period of time. But this is what you've got. This is how I was. This is what it's almost like showing pictures of how I was 10 years ago, where it's 134 kilos, and showing pictures now where I'm about 100 kilos. It's like two different things. I can tell you how I got from A to B, but what happened in the intervening years, don't ask me.
So it's like your path through the bardic grade. It's almost like it's a part of you. Your druidry is a part of you. So sometimes very hard to step out and pinpoint it was this, 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 and this. Is that correct? So it's almost like you're immersed in it.
Yeah. And that's the bit when you're saying about is it what you are or what you do? And that's the bit where I'm saying, although it is what I am, it's what I do. It's how do I perceive things now?
Okay.
Again, I can remember in discussion years ago, so it's completely different, but it was one of those talks about, oh, if you were straight, what would you do? Well, if I was straight, I would believe this. And somebody on this debating board came in and said, how can you say if you were straight? Everything you have done in your life has been influenced from a gay perspective. Whether you've been open about it, whether you've been closeted, whether you've been in denial, it's the fact that within your nature, you're drawn to people of the same sex. Everything has been viewed from that lens. You can't have a view on what would I do if I was straight, because everything that's informed, even of what you think straight people do, is from the lens of being gay. It's kind of like, I can't turn around and say, I would feel like this if I were black. I've not lived a black person's life. I don't have that perspective. And so all you can talk about is how you've lived things and how you perceive them. So again, that goes to me about intrinsic parts of, is druidry a lived experience? And that to me is, well, yes. Because it comes with its own mindset.
Yes. It's a way of thinking. Well, Pat Booker says you're a very wicked man, but let me rescue you from that.
What have I done that's naughty now?
Do you have, talking about, what you do as a druid, do you have a personal practice? Like a daily one, or how often?
Yeah. I remember during during the Bardic grade, where I focused a little bit more on creative arts and doing poems. I did one called Bad Druid No Mead, which each stanza was reflective about what I was supposed to do in druidry and what I ended up doing and how they didn't quite match. And alongside that, I tried to develop some practices like meditation, and in the early days did a whole lot more meditation. One of the things is, when I started off in the Bardic grade, I was living in a part of London where I was less than an hour's walk from work and only sort of like a 10-15 minute bus ride, so my commuting time was much reduced. So I found, right, I can meditate post work. And now that I commute out to the Boundaries, and I find a chunk of my time can be taken there, and depending on when you're traveling back, I have to travel via London Bridge, and a number of times signals at London Bridge are down. And it's like, okay, so that's 3 trains cancelled. Shall I get home before 9 o'clock tonight? The idea of sitting down and meditating just doesn't work that well for me. And so I started off with good intents, and it got down from daily to, well, let's try it once a week. And what I decided instead was just expanding on that simple one that we do, almost like grounding at the start of ritual, of looking at taking the 3 breaths.
Oh, yeah.
And if I just start with that, with a breath with each of the realm, and that whole thing, when you do that, when you go to a meeting or to ritual, it helps bring everyone out of the everyday world and into, right, now we're going to do something that we want to see. It helps create sacred space and sacred time. And I like it because it can be as short as it needs to be, or you can expand upon it. I mean, okay, there's only so long you take over doing 3 breaths, but the fact that you can separate, you don't have to do it right. We're going to do a breath with the earth and straight away go into the next one. You can do that breath with the earth and stay in that moment and focus on how you feel and how you feel connected to earth for as long as necessary. Or you can do all 3 breaths and then say, well, before you rejoin anything else, this is just my meditative space. So if I wish to meditate for longer, I've opened the door to allow that to happen. If I find that I'm absolutely cream crackered, and I know that if I start to meditate, I'm just going to fall asleep, well, then just do a brief moment there, connect with things, and then get on with whatever it is I need to relax or head off to bed or whatever. If, on the other hand, I kind of feel I want a longer period, I can do it. And it's also, it's not limited to even the daily practice. I find that whole thing is a very grounding experience. So there are times, as now I work in the NHS as a nurse and I'm running clinics, and there are times when I've come out of either a meeting or I've been with a patient for whatever reason. It's like I just need to reorientate myself. I either need to de-stress, or I need to sort of let some emotion that's there wash away, or I need to vent. Any of those things. It's like I can shut my clinic room door and go through 3 breaths and calm myself down and recenter myself, ready for the next thing of the day. So I can end up doing that more than once in a day, or I can do that as here's a daily practice. I mean, it's a good thing to start a day with, but there's nothing limiting me from doing it multiple times in the day. And it's almost like the times where you might, oh, I've got a moment, I'm going to quickly plug in my iPhone to recharge it while I'm near a charger. That's the equivalent to what the 3 breaths can do for me. I need something to recharge me. I've got a moment. There's a plug socket. Let's go do it.
You know what? I love you saying that, because it's in, and this is what got me into Druidry with Cassandra Eason's book. And she mentioned, you can have a grove in an apartment in a city. You don't have to be deep in the woods. Now, I love being deep in the woods, but to be able to have a simple practice just like that, taking 3 breaths wherever you are, be it in the tube, on a train, in a hospital ward, wherever, that go to right now where you're standing, exercise to ground you. And of course, you're engaging with the 3 realms, which, earth, sky, sea is just, well, certainly from an Irish perspective, they're the 3 worlds. And that's what's really, really important and grounds us as Druids and as people belonging to this land. I'm talking about, I've gone beyond Ireland now, but engaging with the 3 realms and how simple that is. And I love the analogy is, it's just like plugging in to charge your phone, that it's that simple. And that if you can remember, and I think sometimes the hard thing is, it's very simple to do. Sometimes the hard thing is to remember that you have it there.
I love also overlapping land, sky and sea with physics. We have solid, liquid, gas. We have 3 states. We have 3 realms. Again, when I was reflecting for the Bardic Review, or more so applying for entering OVATE, when it says about looking at the 4 elements, is my mind still goes back to physics. I know we've got a much larger element table, but even if we think of earth, air, and water as elements, I don't consider fire as an element. I go back to physics and think solid, liquid, gas, and catalyst. Fire is a catalyst to me. So seeing it in those 3s, the 3 realms and the breath with each realm, it puts it almost into a more modern scientific thing for me as well. I'm sure I could take a breath with solid, liquid, and gas and get along with that just as well as saying land, sky, sea. But and the bit you're saying earlier about the 3 breaths that you can do anywhere, and looking at urban druidry rather than always, oh, let's be with the, as much as it's lovely to be one with the land, it's like, well, actually the land I'm in is an urban landscape. And sort of reflecting on that, I just thought I'd sneak one in because it came in post the other day. Well, the post it came the other day, and so I'm just now having a look.
Brendan Cowan's book. Yes.
Yeah.
I remember when that's Brendan's book. Wonderful.
That's my latest one to have a look through. I've had one before on urban paganism, but I've not looked at one specifically looking at urban druidry. And that is something that because of where I am, I have labelled myself more as an urban druid than a country druid. It'd be lovely. I grew up on farms when I was a kid, but I've lived in towns and cities now for so long. And that was one of the other things that used to always get me when people would talk about whatever animal they associated with, whether they want to use the term of totem animal or power animal, both of which I'm not keen on the terms, but it's the fact that everyone was always picking the same thing, that they're all associating with things that aren't anywhere near them. Where were the people who were celebrating the cockroach, the rat, and the pigeon? As much as I find affiliation with bear, I
wonder why.
I still kind of think, well, actually, that near to where I am, near to where this nature reserve is, there is a large murder of crows, and they are roosting around there. And because I've got, you may have seen his tail waggling around earlier, it's disappeared. I've got my cat Schrodinger, so it really isn't safe for me to feed birds near my household, because that's like, here, come eat, and then let my cat slaughter you. Because so I feed the birds away from home. So one of my things is feeding the birds most mornings on my commute. I feed the crows on the way into work. And so crows to me are much more of, if I was going to look at an animal that I can relate to, they are what I see. They are what I encourage. I feed them on a regular basis. Then turning around and going, oh, ravens. Ravens are lovely. They're corvids as well. They're brilliant birds, but I don't see ravens about the place. I see common carrion crow. And so that's what I associate with.
That's beautiful. I remember Peter Costin. He was one of my earlier guests. And one of his sacred waterways was this stream that he'd pass on his way to work, full of rubbish, and yet I remember the first time I met him talking about that and honouring that, where normally, I mean, I'm really lucky. I'm out here, I'm looking over the River Nore and I have trees and all of that stuff. But it's to be able to find the sacred wherever you are. Ben mentions a huge lesson he took from the Bardic grade was finding the sacred between the cracks in the pavement. And I think you're talking about that. And then Valentina says the cockroach in ancient Egypt, the Kefri, the holy scarab, which actually is a dung beetle. So there's something really important to honor whatever animals are in your environment. I remember the first time I did a journey for a power animal, it was a chicken. And I thought, I'm not doing that. And I gave up. I said, I'm not having a power animal as a chicken. The arrogance of it. And the second time I did it, I got a B and I accepted the B. But it's I was waiting for whatever. And it's a really, really interesting that you talk about the animals that are in your environment, because they're part of your tribe in a way.
I can't think of the title of the song now, but there's a lovely folk artist, a pagan one, Talis Kimberley, and there's a song that she does when we said about cracks in the pavement, where she's talking about wherever you find green in the city, that's where Jack is. So talking about where some weeds have forced their way through cracks in the pavement and grown there. Talking about where so something has grown in the guttering and there's a plant flowering there. The patches in the playground where grass has grown and the dandelions have taken root. Those are the places where you see Jack in the Green coming through into your world. And I wish I could remember right now the title of the song. It's a lovely song based on that whole concept.
And it's beautiful because if you look at a patch of grass and a playground, it's not just grass that's there. There'll be loads of insects. There'll be loads of other things that are there as well. You know, if you only take the time to have a look and to really, really honour them.
And another one was in a discussion with a friend of mine who probably identifies as urban druid as well. We just happen to, most of the time, when people look at urban landscape, it's like, oh, that's ugly and that's concrete and that's brutal. And both of us actually find something we like amongst the brutalism that is the Barbican Centre.
Okay.
There's this, in some ways, hideous, ugly thing made up of concrete, everything, but they've placed waterways there, they've placed trees there, they've placed plants there. And one of the things I've always liked when going up there's a really nice little spot that's in an open walkway that I like, and it's where you've got something called the Mendelssohn tree.
Go on.
It's not even a tree anymore. It is a small stump of wood that is the surviving remnant of a tree where Mendelssohn used to be under, that where he used to sit and think and compose. And it's there with a plaque in the middle of this really stark area.
Wow.
I just find it a really quiet, meditative space. And you have people wandering by, but I can just sit there and just stare at it and contemplate. And it's in one of the most, the Barbican in a lot of ways is one of the most brutal architecture that you can find in London. But there's the fact that within there, they've also got their own greenhouses within it. With with sort of tropical plants and everything. They've done things to try and say, in some ways, it's almost like taming nature, which there's part of me that reacts against, but there's other ways of saying, well, let's infuse this concrete structure with something natural. And so that bit of looking to what's in the landscape, I think that's I actually like parts of the Barbican because of that design.
Wonderful. Gail says, finding the sacred everywhere. Absolutely. I didn't know Mendelssohn lived in England. I would have that bit up. I remember it was a part of England that he was at where the tree, I think, was destroyed in a storm. Okay.
But I'm not at liberty to go Google that and find that bit out for you. But there you go. There's your task, people. You can go Google about Mendelssohn's tree at the Barbican.
Okay, somebody says, Linshore, cities are beautiful green spaces when you spend the time to notice. And I think that's a very important one, is being able to find it. If you live in one, you need to. If it's not green, find ways to help it make it greener and more natural. And I suppose that's what they've attempted in the Barbican.
I think one of the other aspects there for me is the seed group that I belong to. So as much as I identified, because it's the first place I went to, is the Andera de Gorseth, and I will go down to the Long Mountain of Wilmington when we're allowed in and join there. But also I kind of looked at, well, sometimes whenever I was doing that, it actually involves an entire day to be able to go down there, take part at ritual, come back, unless you want to literally zoom in and out, which I don't like. And they often happen around the same weekend that Andera de Gorseth will do their ritual on the Sunday. And often around the same weekend, the Tamisis seed group will have theirs on the Saturday.
Wonderful.
And so I've gone more and more within the Tamisis seed group. And one of the nice things about
Ferdiad, isn't it?
It's Ferdiad, yeah. So it's because it's a London-based seed group, rather than saying we will meet here in this location each time, it's almost like a goblin market. It changes its location. So that for instance, for Samhain, we will meet in Queen's Wood. For autumn equinox, we always go to Richmond Park because at that time of year, the deer are out there and they're rutting, and it just seems so fitting. But the fact that these spaces within London, so you've got Queen's Wood that you can go to, you've got Richmond Park. We've held ceremony and ritual in Green Park in London. The other one we've done is Victoria Gardens by the Thames, right next to the Houses of Parliament.
Ooh.
And we've held ritual in there. We've had some odd looks from people at times, but we've held ritual there. as well as obviously once a year we have to do a little pilgrimage to Primrose Hill, but we move site each time.
Beautiful.
And although there are a couple of places that are fixed now, so that autumn equinox will be Richmond Park, and we're pretty much fixed that Samhain and Beltane will be in Queenswood. The others, if people come up to us with locations that are appropriate, then we'll use them. But we're using locations within London. We're finding green spaces within London. And the other wonderful thing I find about Temis is it really does try to be inclusive, so that we're looking at places where, wherever possible, as close as we can, we'll have some form of disability access. Obviously, if you go into the wild itself, you can't help. So once we get into Queenswood, you're going to need to be able to go off the path somewhere to find some. But we've picked other spaces. That's why we've done ritual, for instance, at Primrose Hill, where we've done it very close to the path that people who aren't so mobile can be there as well. And if members of the public look at us as being weird, well, they're right, we are. And we always try to pick somewhere, so we mention what routes of access there are for public access, and we normally try to look for somewhere that people can get that's step-free if possible. Yeah. We look at somewhere where there'll be a cafe somewhere near where we can all centrally meet, because you know what it's like at times it's bad enough at sometimes when people talk about druid or pagan time, that things don't go exactly to time, but you're also dealing with people trying to travel across London, and unless they leave significantly early, there can always be delays in parts. So we try to kind of say, right, we're going to meet at 1:30, aiming to leave for 2 o'clock, and we're going to meet at this cafe. So people come down, have refreshments, and then we'll go off. So there's little bits to try and make it as open and welcoming as possible. But by going through the different sites within London, finding where those green spaces are and making use of them. Well, the other ones we've held Crystal Palace Park.
Wow.
We've held ritual there on a few occasions. And you just find somewhere that's a little bit quieter. If you've got people who are a bit too shy about celebrating out in the open.
Just listening to you, how you've made the city your own and how open the city is to you, to your grove, allowing you, or revealing itself to you, revealing those places to you, to be able to hold ritual, I think it's just magic. It's just wonderful. And that just even that little piece is a wonderful example of urban druidry, how you work with the city and the city reveals itself to you, all of those green spaces that you're talking about. I've heard of them. I've never been to any of them, but I think it's fascinating. So thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
Just about Mendelssohn, of course, was in Scotland. I mean, Fingal's Cave. I was in Staffa Island. I just didn't associate him with London. I'm sure, of course, he went to London. But somebody said London was built on a fascinating mix of sacred places through time. Absolutely. There's a question there from Sean Hinchliffe. What is your favorite Druid book? Just somebody, he asked that. So do you have a favorite Druid book?
It's not really teaching you about Druidry it's also, but I do like Blood and Mistletoe from Professor Ronald Hutton. So it's looking more at the historical aspect of Druidry. And it's, as I think I mentioned before, it's looking more at how Druids have been portrayed and received, rather than telling you really what Druidry is or what it does. But I just thought looking at that going through time was a really interesting way. I know one of the books that came out was titled Blood and Mistletoe, and there was one with a different title, but they were both the same book.
Okay.
He released 2 editions, and one was done for non-academic historians, and one was done more for academic historians. So my brain's struggling to remember which was which now. I can see one of them on the bookshelf over there, but I can't see where the other one's got to. But one of them took time periods and the other took themes. So it looked at, this is where druids have been portrayed as being intellectuals, and this is where druids have been portrayed as barbarians, and drew those collective themes, and went to different time periods. Whereas the other one was much more, we'll start at this period before Common Era, and we'll go up to this period, and the themes will be covered in those different chapters. But so one's a heavier read than the other. He's got the both of them have the same historical details, but it's just how he's written them are different. And I must admit, I think I went through the one that was a lot easier to read first, and the other one I sort of dipped into.
Okay. What would you say has...
But sorry, I was going to add one other thing. It's not specifically Druidry, but it is. And that is a work of fiction, and that's Manda Scott and her Boudica series.
Okay.
She refers to Boudica, and in there she refers to a group of people that she's calling the Dreamers. But Boudica and the philosophers and the warriors and the magicians of that time, we're really talking about Druidry. And the way she writes is just absolutely wonderful.
So what, maybe you afterwards you can type it in, on Facebook or something, on the OBOD Facebook page, just to, if anybody wants to get that reference. Wonderful. What has been your, what are you most proud of in terms of your life? Or what has been your greatest achievement?
Okay. It's kind of topical because right now on Channel 4, you've got the series It's a Sin by Russell Davies that's covering the early years of the HIV epidemic in the UK. One of the things for me was within nursing. I worked at the London Lighthouse, which was the largest centre in Europe for people with HIV and AIDS. And we didn't call it a hospice, but what you had was a residential unit, and the functions were similar to a hospice. And we did palliative care, and we also did respite care. So with some of the people that came in, they came in over a number of years for respite care, and you got to know them, and then they may also then have come in for palliative care. And I worked there for about 5 years.
Okay.
And helping people to, for want of a better term, to achieve a good death. That, to me, those 5 years were the greatest achievement I feel I had, because I had the privilege of being able to have an impact on people's final days. And not just of the person who died, but of their significant others. And we're talking about in a health and disease process where these were the disenfranchised. We're talking about, it was the early days. It wasn't the gay population. You just started with some gay civil rights, and then along came HIV.
Okay.
And it was fortunate in some ways, because you'd had all the people that had been in things like the Gay Liberation Front and were used to campaigning, and they eventually were able to use some of those skills to campaign for better terms and conditions for people with HIV. But that took a while. The initial reaction to people with HIV, even amongst healthcare, was just absolutely awful. And the model of care that came out of the Lighthouse was not a model of care I'd seen anywhere else in the NHS. There was a big effort to challenge society's death-denying concepts. We didn't want to force things on people in general, but open up. So you didn't turn around to a resident and turn around and say, oh, this is your last week, you're going to die. You still obviously have to look at what people are ready for, and some people were never ready. But you could work towards it. You could try and provide somewhere that was a refuge, a sanctuary, somewhere where you could nurture and comfort people, because there were so many deeply wounded people.
Yeah.
Aside from their physical illness, aside from the fact that they were facing their death. Sorry.
That's okay.
Because this has been topical.
Yeah.
It's and because with Channel 4 they can drop a whole series. And I was at home with nothing to do, and I ended up binge watching this series, which probably wasn't the wisest thing to do. Part three is on this Friday. I've watched the entire thing, and I did the first 2 episodes and then the final 3, and the final 3 are where it gets really emotional. With friends and stuff at that time, I've had some conversations. This has gone through my mind a lot. I've had a lot of reflection on that time. I had an interview with a journalist a couple of days ago for an article that came out in the Metro today, reflecting on that. And it's important to reflect on that. But one, it's an ideal time that we are in HIV testing week. And we also need, now that we've got a large chunk of the nation and then the media have been paying attention to this series. And it's a time where we can try and update information. That we only ever had that one big national campaign with John Hurt talking over tombstones and icebergs. And nothing has been updated as a national thing since. There's a large number of people who don't know that this series portrayed some of the hardships and difficulties of that time. And that, I say, working through that time was very difficult, but it's my proudest achievement. It involved the fact that we dropped a whole load of boundaries. We were really encouraged to befriend the residents. Because it was affecting our own age group. So this is 20, 30 years ago now, but it was when I started there just before my 30th birthday. And the people I was looking on after were generally my age or younger. And we're not used to seeing that many people dying. And going through a week, you could go to work in a day and find yourself losing 2 patients. And then come in the next. And because the philosophy when we looked at challenging people's death-denying concepts was trying to make things more life-affirming and including within that death is a natural part of life.
Indeed.
And that included things like, for an example, we used to get people who, because even undertakers and were refusing to deal with a lot of the HIV positive people, we got set up so that we would be able to hold funerals and memorials at the lighthouse. The nursing staff on the residential unit, we ran the mortuary.
Wow.
So we took the concept of care and after death care absolutely literally.
Wow.
So you would have met this patient maybe several times because they'd come in at periods of respite. Then they're coming in for their actual palliative care. During that time, for those that did have significant drugs, people see if they watch this series how some people were treated. So sometimes when they were dying was the first time their family even found out they were gay, let alone that they had HIV. So you're dealing with there were cans of worms being opened all over the place, and it could be very traumatic. But other people, the family were aware, or their chosen family are where. There are a lot of people who their birth family they didn't deal with, but their chosen family came in. You got to know them and they got to know you. And for instance, the sitting rooms, there's a smoking room and a non-smoking room. And that day, those we still had the smoking room.
I remember them way back.
But the staff were encouraged to use those rooms. We didn't have a separate staff rest area.
Wow.
So if you wanted a tea break, you got yourself a coffee and you sat in the sitting room with the residents. And if they wanted to engage, you engaged with them, or you talked amongst yourself, but you didn't isolate yourself. We were one, almost like a family. It was incredibly huggy and touchy-feely. I've never been in another place in my life where virtually every day when you started the shift, you started with hugging.
It's wonderful.
And God, I miss hugging right now. Anyway, excuse me.
I'm in tears too.
I'm a silly sod at times. Anyway,
so there are people saying,
started the day with that. It was really tactile. You were really personal with people. When you've been looking after that person during their palliative care and the relatives or their chosen family were coming in, when that person died, they would the people that wanted to then view them would phone the residential unit. We would look for who was working on that day, who had been looking after that person when he was alive, or she.
Yes.
And wherever possible, if there's somebody who had been involved in their care, who knew the chosen family or real family, whichever. Well, Armistead Maupin came up with the term logical family rather than biological family. I like that. Yes. So credit to Armistead Maupin there, for the author of Tales of the City. So whoever had been working with that resident when they were alive would go down to the mortuary, and we asked people to give us notice. So if they gave us at least half an hour's notice, we would go down, we would take them from the shelf in the fridges, and we would put them on the bed in the viewing room. And our whole thing there, we never covered people up.
Yeah.
In hospitals, there's always, you do lost offices, you put a face cloth on, you wrap them in sheets. The moment we got somebody coming from our neighbouring hospitals to us because we would hold the memorial or funeral rather than from a hospital, the first thing we did is we threw away that body bag. They always came in body bags. We always threw them away. We would then do any cleaning that was necessary of that person. We would take the request of the family or chosen family, and we would dress them in the way they wanted to be dressed. We would take them and we would place them in that bed with their arms over the sheets and the sheets up to the top of their chest. When we put them even in the freezer, they only ever had a sheet up to their chest. We never covered their faces. I know in a lot of people see covering a face as a sign of respect, but to what we came to believe, and part of our ethos was covering the face wasn't a respect. It was that the living didn't want to have to confront and face the dead. So we didn't do that. Again, in hospitals, if somebody passes away, it was you're pulling screens and curtains around everyone, and along comes this box-like wagon. They lift the lid off, stick a body and close it, and off you go again. We did not do that. We went round the residential unit. It was a 24-bedded unit originally and dropped down to 23. And it was a mixture of single rooms and twin rooms and some slightly larger rooms. And we went round and we'd say to people, John H. has just died. We're going to be taking him down in the next 15 minutes. If you don't want to see him, please stay in your room. If you want to come and say goodbye to him, come into the corridor.
That is just, that is so beautiful.
And people would come out into the corridor and they would make their final goodbyes. And then we would take that person down. Again, some people might even, with permission of the extended family, go into a viewing later as well. So, as I say, when we would get them out, we would meet the family, we would take them. We would be either just outside in a room next to the viewing room, or we would go back to the unit and say, here's the phone, call us if you want, depending on what they personally wanted. But they kept that relationship up with somebody who knew the person that they cared for. When I moved out of Lighthouse and went back into the NHS, the very first time I had to do last offices and I had to cover somebody's face and I had to wrap them up, I hated that with a vengeance. And I've never found anything to replicate that experience, that whole ethos of nursing care that happened at Lighthouse. And that period and having that time, and it was during a time when there were so many deaths.
Yes.
Because we were also, the ethos of the place included that where practical, members of the team looking after that resident were given time during their working day, if they were on duty, to go to the memorial.
Beautiful.
And we had structured support time as well. But there was such a volume of people that died during that period. And
yes.
and for some of those people, helping them realize these are your final days. And for other people, just making things as they may not have come to a place where they could accept that, but you're just then making their existence as pleasant as it could be. The other thing that we absolutely factored in is we ensured never to leave somebody to die on their own. If we saw somebody, that we knew there are the signs and symptoms you're aware of, so we made sure if there were no family or friends staying, that we allocate a member of staff to stay with that person.
That was my experience of nursing as a student nurse. That I started at 19 as a nurse, and my second day on the wards, I laid out a woman who had passed. I was helping a staff nurse, but we always would have been, if they didn't have their relatives, so at night sometimes, holding their hand as they passed. And I know from Howard, who died at home, I was so pleased we had palliative care team. So he had a similar passing to what you offered the people in the Lighthouse. And I know how important and how valuable, how precious being able to pass in that way.
And that is what's so horrendous about some of the hospital conditions now with some people with coronavirus, where they're not allowing visitors in and they're limited. And it's like, thankfully, again, I know for our own intensive care staff, we make sure there's an intensive care nurse so that nobody dies alone.
Wonderful. Yeah.
The brilliant thing is, again, as I said, it's HIV testing week now, is that hopefully nobody has to go through, I wouldn't want anyone to have to go. I very much value what we did. And as I say, I see it as one of my biggest achievements.
It certainly is.
But I don't want anyone to have to deal with that level again. And the greatest thing in terms of HIV, I'm sorry to turn this a public health broadcast, is, first of all, the treatments are so much better. You have to bear in mind that before 96, we didn't have decent antiretroviral cover. We didn't know what we were doing. So my first 3 years at Lighthouse, there was nothing that we could really offer people. And people, the death rate was so high. In 96, they started with antiviral therapies, which over the past 20, 30 years have improved so much that the vast majority of people now go on one pill once a day with minimal side effects and can live as long a life as if they didn't have HIV. Tied with that, now we have absolute evidence again to show that if people take their medication, they've got an undetectable viral load, it is untransmittable. So you can have an HIV positive partner and have sex without a condom. And for added security, you now have PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, where the person who's HIV negative can take a pill once a day. Their partner's taking their antiretrovirals, and we now put people on antiretrovirals virtually from the day of diagnosis. You can live a normal life. You can have a loving relationship. There's no more of this stuff about you can't do this, you can't do that. There's so few limitations there. So we shouldn't have to go through a period like that with HIV again. And hopefully there are things we can learn about looking at how we minimize transmission risks now that we can also apply to the current pandemic.
Absolutely. There's that piece, but there's also how allowing people to die. I mean, I assume things have changed in hospices, that that notion of a hospice is there caring, that notion of palliative care, I'm hoping. We are still in our death and dying rituals in Ireland are still going strong, and around waking people. Of course, COVID has changed all of this, and this is one of the big griefs in Ireland, is not being able to have proper wakes or proper funerals and burials and accompanying people as they pass. I think that is really, really difficult. But it's just, you write so beautifully. Or you write. Oh, you don't write, do you? Maybe you should. You speak so beautifully of that experience. I think it'd be worth recording it. It's just and I know from the comments here that people are so moved by what you've shared, Ricky. That is an incredible achievement.
I will do one other plug, if I may, then.
Please do.
Because I also, at one stage, I was on the British, the National HIV Nursing Association committee. And during that time, got approached for a project with the British Library, who have looked at taking an oral history of British healthcare workers during the AIDS era.
Ooh, okay.
And I had a few hours being interviewed for that, and there's some recordings. It was all supposed to go ahead, and then unfortunately, around the time when people were going to be made more public about how to access this at a British Library, we've had COVID come along. But there is a whole exhibition, so you can go to the British Library and you can listen to. They've got about 100 different people's recordings, different perspectives. I know from a couple of other colleagues at Lighthouse, including the volunteers at Lighthouse who's done some recordings, and again through my connections in HIV, I know a number of other people. There are a whole host of oral history tapes from different healthcare workers during that period, and that will be in perpetuity at the British Library, to go there and listen to them. There is a website where you can hear a few snippets of interest, but there has been recordings done, and so I know I've done some recordings myself for them.
Oh, wonderful. And Keith Thurlow Bishop, I worked at the Lighthouse too in the late 90s, a magical and sacred place. So you have a brother there. So I'm just blown away. I'm actually quite moved myself. I'm just trying to keep the tears from in my voice.
If I had better control, but there you go.
No, tears are beautiful because you're speaking absolutely from your heart. And just looking at the comments here, people are blown away by what you've been sharing. Ricky, I don't know. I know you said you don't journal, but you have a story that people need to hear. That's from Andy Gordon. But of course, you have. There's a recording of you. What are you most grateful for, Ricky? And what brings you joy?
Oh, sound really corny, but I think that one of the things I'm most grateful for is the love and support I get from my sister, my big sister. And that's been something lifelong, because my sister's 8 years older than me.
Okay.
So that means, so when I was born and she was 8, so by the time I was 4, one of my earliest memories I've got, and it is because I've also got a photo of it, is her holding me when I was about 4 years old, and she was 12, and she's looking after me. I know she did a lot of childcare for me at the time. I know for its time, my brothers and my sister, we were all latchkey children.
Mm-hmm.
But my mother had to go to work at one stage, and initially my birth father was working as well, and then later I had a stepfather, and he would be working, and most of the time mum would be at work. So my formative, really early years, my sister was heavily involved, and even later, she left the house when she was not so long after she turned 18, but up till then,
she was there.
she was there, and she's still there now. So it's the same. Like, because that article from the Metro came out today, I kind of forwarded it to her because I didn't want anybody she knew reading it and then saying, "Have you seen this?"
Okay.
So I passed it on to her, and again, she was like, "Well, do you need any to talk? Do you need any support?" Because she read through, she could see some things I'd put in that were a little emotive. But yeah, I think that I've got my big sister. She's a mainstay. My eldest brother emigrated over to Australia, so we sort of communicate occasionally, but not in the same way. My other brother, unfortunately, was killed in a traffic accident 2 years ago. So it's my sister and I that kind of left here, and dealing also with the lovely day-to-day issues that go with caring for an elderly relative as well. So in terms of managing how mum's doing and what we can do, and even the simplest things of IT and tech problems for mum. My mother lives in Wales, and my sister and I are both down south. So there's a lot of remote care and work going on.
And how old is your mum?
She's, am I allowed to say? Yeah, she's 86. She'll be 87 in March.
And my mother would
declare herself 87 yet.
2 years older than my mother. And is she well?
Relatively. That was the problems towards the end of last year, where she had real bad problems with common bile duct stone, and she was quite ill. And unfortunately, she was ill during lockdown because, bear in mind, Wales had separate lockdown rules, so it was really difficult to try and get over there. And again, she had got admitted into hospital and was in hospital for 9 or 10 days the first time round, and that was during a time where they banned any visitors at all. And then she came out, and she was out for only 3 days before I had to phone an ambulance and get her readmitted, and she was in for another 10. And the hospital she was at had turned around and said that once somebody had been a patient for 10 days, then they would allow visitors. So she was in for 10 days and discharged. You could only have a timed 20-minute visit. And unfortunately, the hospital she's in is nowhere near where she lives. So she lives in the Brecon region, and the nearest hospital is across the border in England, in Hereford. So it wouldn't even be that if I went up there, I'd be staying at her house and going to visit. Hereford's sort of like 40 miles away, and there's not good links between the two for people who don't drive.
Yeah,
I went up and stayed with her on discharge because I had the right kerfuffle with the hospital. I'd gone through all sorts of explanations about how the first discharge was unsatisfactory. Why did they think I got her readmitted by ambulance 3 days later? And I made plans with them and saying, give me some notice and I will take leave and go there. My manager was extremely good there. They phoned up on the Monday and said, we're discharging her today, whether you can get here or not.
Yeah, yes.
Massive arguments with them, and then spoke to my sister, who then phoned them as well. And we got them to change their mind and said they would discharge her on the Tuesday. So that I went to my manager and said, I need time off now. And I went up and stayed with my mother for about 10 days to help her convalesce until we could get, because they hadn't even set up any home care social services. So I had to set all that up before I could then leave. And I managed to get out of Wales just before yet another lockdown came in. So she's been recovering from that. And I think the whole couple of long periods in hospital where you couldn't have any visitors anyway, and then being in sort of lockdown and trying to socially isolate, it's knocked her confidence and stuff at the moment. And so she's well, but that's recuperating, for want of a better
term. Because we're coming to the end of our time, but what gives you hope in these times and going forward?
I think hope is when you see other people reaching out and doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we get very, very insular.
Yes.
And we can get very me-centric as well. And I think it's the genuine reaching out that I'm thinking of more than the I've forgotten even the term for it. Virtue signaling.
Yes, yes.
So when there are some people who, for instance, wanted to show an outpouring of their sympathy and thanks for oh, my brain's melting right now. The elderly gentleman, Captain Tom, was
the man who
did the walking, yeah. That spontaneous level, yes. But seeing some MPs come out on their doorstep, it was like, no, you're just cashing in on this. The actions that he did in the first place to raise funding was just marvelous. The fact that we'd had a government that had forced an elderly pensioner to have to do that to raise funds rather than adequately funding an NHS in the first place, well, that's the bit that's really disgusting. But the fact that we had somebody who did that. The other day, I was coming home and I was getting really... I've recently had COVID, and so I've been recovering, and I got really short of breath and was having palpitations. I had to take a seat. And there's one of the neighbours who I haven't seen for, because nobody's seen neighbours of any shape or form lately, who was walking by, and he just stopped immediately because it was like, well, are you okay? Because I was sat down within 2 minutes walk of where I actually live, but it's where I needed to take a sit. And it was like his genuine concern came out to check, how was I? Was I okay? Did I need to be walked home? Did I need anyone calling? That level of participation from someone in the community. We don't hang around. We didn't hang in each other's houses beforehand. He's about 3 doors down, but we always said hello. But the fact that he takes that moment for genuine concern for a neighbour, that gives me hope that we have community who have compassion and who can show that openly without sort of... There was nothing, there was no grandstanding there. That was just, I can see you looking distressed, are you okay? And once he's assured I was okay, that's fine. He was able to go on. That level of having a neighbour that has an awareness of you to that degree, even though you're not best friends or anything like that, that's kind of inspirational to me.
I think it absolutely is, because it's a very simple act. I fell off my bike a month ago on the ice, and a car stopped, and they drove me home on the bike, and we put our masks on and everything. And I was really, really, they had seen me many times cycling by. It was on a route. I didn't know them. And that kindness, and saying, no, we are taking you home. And I almost said, no, it's fine, which would have been a crazy thing, just gone home on the ice. But that just, and I met them again in the woods, and I just said, I have to thank you again. They go, but this was nothing. I said, no, that was just such a beautiful act that you did. They put me in their car, so there's a risk there in these times. And we both had our masks, and I just thought that was such a genuine act of kindness. And it's those small things, I think, make the neighborhood. We're not friends. They live quite a bit of, about a 15-minute drive away from me. But it's that kindness, just that simple.
And it shows
of kindness
within a community. That again, the whole, going back to the whole thing about connection, there was a human connection there. That simple response of checking where you're okay.
It costs nothing, absolutely nothing. But all those, if you had enough of those in your community without knowing many people, it actually helps you feel much safer, and you feel held by almost like an invisible thread, but you're safe. And then that makes you more giving and more compassionate. And it snowballs.
Well, just as we talk about the negative and about microaggressions and how they build up so that people can get really hurt at something small, there's the reverse. Random acts of kindness are just brilliant.
They are, absolutely. Listen, we have to stop here. You have broken the record. We have gone over 2 hours, Ricky.
Sorry.
It has been
no mead.
No, bad druid, no mead. Okay. It has been such an absolute joy having this conversation with you. It's been absolutely wonderful. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'm just looking from the comments, and I suggest that afterwards you can go through the comments yourself, and you may want to respond to some. There were too many. There's one, Ricky, please let your tears flow and never feel sorry for them. Indeed, they are gifts of humble heart. Never stop scattering your inner light of love and compassion outwardly into the shadows of those lost among the stumbles of life. Well, that is just beautiful, isn't it? So a moving and enriching conversation. Beautiful chat, Ricky. Thank you. So deeply moving. So it's like when you're epic. This is from Pat Booker. By the way, she wasn't referring to you as the wicked man. It was somebody else. I'm sorry about that. I hope you're not disappointed now. But so
maybe we go post it to her on Facebook.
You've gone from being wicked to being epic. I hope that's an elevation rather than a demotion. But it's just been an absolute joy. So hang on there, and I'm just going to say goodbye to people. Okay. So thank you all for joining us again this evening, and we're going to look at the comments, because there was coming so fast I didn't get to acknowledge all of them. And I look forward to seeing you next week for another Fireside Chat. I hope you can join us at 7 o'clock Universal Time this Saturday for the Order's Imulk ceremony. So in the meantime, Slán go fóill, go nairi live, and see you next week. Bye-bye.